Why is Joyce my number one man?
Yeah.
You know, literature. um, much safer alternative for men.
I agree. It's done a really good job at making me not have time for men. What is the most memorable conversation that you've had about James Joyce?
I can't think of really too many, to be honest, that I've had other than the one Spectrum conversation I think we had.
What was that like?
It's very interesting because his, do you call them a novel book?
Yeah, we read his short stories. We read Dublin, or like the first two stories, I think, of Dubliners.
Yeah. So reading those are like a very different type of literature than I'm used to reading. Because it seems like a lot of the stories are something that like you actually have to read into a lot more, and like he doesn't just give you all of the information necessarily, or like he doesn't treat the readers like they don't know anything. You kind of have to read between what he says to like actually sometimes get all of the meaning.
Okay.
And I think that's like an interesting way to have books, and that's probably why he's a lot more memorable than some other types of books.
No, I agree for sure. That's what stands out to me about him as well. I don't know. I really like how he, like you said, like how he's like, no, you can figure it out, you know. And at first, I think, like you said, we're used to reading other types of things, so we're like, no, we can't. But when you sit down with it, you're like, oh, yes, I can. You read the two first stories of Dubliners. Have you read any else of his work, or tried to read it, or absolutely will not read it?
I am not even 100% sure what his other books are.
Okay. Why not?
I think they're interesting, but when I read, it's a lot more for like I read a lot more casually than I think his stories are ever going to be. Is just what I got from the first few, that I do actually have to kind of pay attention and analyze things, and that's great, and I love doing that for a lot of things in my life, but when I'm reading in my free time, that's not always what I want to do.
Who is James Joyce?
I know he has a daughter.
Okay.
And he's a writer of some books. I'm assuming he's from Europe.
Correct. Ireland, specifically.
Okay, he is from Ireland. Okay, I wasn't, maybe it was like maybe it was like a Can I Google it?
No. The point of the project is to like see what people think without the Googling and all that behind work.
He seems like a really like old dude. I mean, he's probably not alive anymore.
Correct.
I don't think.
He died in the 30s. Seems... Just so you...
Okay, so yeah, but was he old when he wrote the books?
So like the ones that we read, he was 25. So they came out, I think, in 1914.
I always pictured him as very old.
No, and then like Ulysses, which is sort of his most famous one, and when I studied, it came out when he was 38. So, no, not super old.
I pictured him as a very old dude writing these stories in Ireland.
You know what's wild too? He did not like being in Ireland at all. So he moved into what he called like a voluntary exile. So even though he was writing about Ireland, he was like in like Paris and Trieste and Rome.
Well, yeah, I'd probably go there too if
Right.
I could. I don't know if I'd write about back home, but I guess if that's what he was interested in.
Has there been any moment or event that changed your understanding of Joyce? And I think I specifically want to ask you, like, had you at all heard his name before we did the like Dubliners reading and I did the presentation on Lucia and that sort of thing? Like, even in passing or like just seen his book in a bookstore or anything like that and like gotten an impression of it before I kind of like told you a bit more about it?
I had never heard of him ever. I have also talked to a few people about this interview and they're like, who is James Joyce? And they are like all academics in science. And we're like, I've never heard of this person in my life. So I didn't have any opinion of him before you started talking about him.
That's so interesting. I hadn't thought of it as a, I wonder if it is a disciplinary thing. It makes me want to do almost like just a mini survey of science students and be like, do you know James Joyce?
Well, it's not, I don't think any of his things are like done in like high school or introductory like university English courses. I don't think he's a typical author. So that's really like the only exposure I'd ever have to him or to most authors with classical like literature. If it's at least you could only just read a little short story instead of a whole book.
That's true.
That's probably the only reason I read it is because I knew it was going to be like a few pages and not a whole book that I had to go through.
Particularly thinking of Bloomsday last summer. How, I don't know, how was that for you? Did it have any Joycean vibes or what happened to that day?
Drinks and some food and people dressed up that you'd expect like an English lit major to dress. And we went to an Irish pub.
Yes, we did.
So that was relevant. We went to a bookstore and looked at books, all very related to him. I still don't know what Bloomsday actually is. In context, I think it's from there, and it's when everything happens in the book.
Yeah. So Ulysses takes place all on one day, June 16th. And so June 16th is Bloomsday now because the main character is named Mr. Bloom. So.
Okay.
There you go. There's a fun fact. See, you knew it, even though you thought you didn't. You do.
That's about the extent of Bloomsday. It was mostly just eating food and drinking.
Honestly, I think Joyce would love it.
What are you actually looking to get out of it? Like, what are you trying to analyze?
Yeah. Well, I think I don't really want to analyze anything. Like, I don't think I'm going to put all of these discussions together and have, be like, oh, I found this grand through line that, everybody thinks this similarly. I think what I'm really interested in doing is like, to me, the Joyce scholarship that I've read anyway is so like authoritative, where it's sort of like, oh, let us teach you how to understand who James Joyce is and how to read Ulysses, and there's no other way. And so I think I'm just interested in seeing like how diverse it actually is, like people's understandings of James Joyce. And like, even though you've only read 2 of his short stories, you like have this understanding of him that is completely fine, you know what I mean? And like, why should we value like my reading of Joyce or my understanding of Joyce above yours,
Not a scientific approach, but
yeah, it's quite
social commentary.
Quite qualitative. I thought I was going into it with a more scientific approach where I was like, okay, like something is going to emerge where everyone will say one thing and then I can be like, this one nugget is Joyce.
Mhm.
And then I started talking to people and it was like, never mind. Everyone, like even just that first question of like, who is James Joyce? Like
Mhm.
not once the same. Like, so will be most memorable to you about this conversation, whether just like how annoying or frustrating it was, or if like anything stood out to you, if your opinion of Joyce changed at all, slightly.
Um, I think it's more just realizing that like your experience of this person is so different to mine
Mhm.
in that it's surprising to you that I've never heard of him before. You started talking about him. And I
Mhm.
think that's just interesting that we actually like we grew up in similar-ish like
Mhm.
environments, but completely different influences apparently.
Yeah, I know. And I feel like especially now that I'm sort of like, you know what I mean, like studying Joyce in grad school, so I think I'm quite steeped in it. It is always a nice reminder that some people like don't even know that he existed because I think I can get too caught up in being like he's very important to me. That's good to know. Nice and humbling.
Yeah.
Yeah, because literary grad students aren't humbled enough, but
I should probably read some of his books so I can follow along with what you're saying a bit more sometimes.
you could just read the rest of Dubliners. They're short.
What is your best recommendation for a book from him?
I would genuinely start with Dubliners for sure. Because I feel like you can it's nice in that you can sort of take these bite-sized chunks of like most of the stories are sort of like 10 to 20 pages. So you can just read it at that time. But you can also sort of like they're very much interconnected. And so I think as much as it's just a collection of short stories where you can take them on your own, you can already see how Joyce is pulling to or like does pull together, a longer piece that is the whole collection. So I think it's a nice little entry point,
Okay.
and also just gorgeous.